come outside. It's going to go two ways. Okay. You either come out, or I'm going to break the door in.
Tell me
They're up, two. Shots fired, shots fired, shots fired. Shots fired.
What's up, everybody? Great Lakes here, and today's video comes to you from Thermopolis, Wyoming. I don't have the records I typically have when I put out a video, but there's a pretty good story done by a local news agency that has a pretty accurate description of what's going on. We've also got the body camera footage with a whole bunch of cops bleeding on it. To see the unedited version of this, go to the Constitutional News Network Facebook page. Link will be in the description because it is too violent for YouTube. It's pretty gnarly, so strap in. Here we go.
On April 28, 2023, at approximately 12:34 p.m., Sergeant Mascoro was involved in a critical incident which culminated in an officer-involved shooting and resulted in the death of Buck Larimore and critical injuries to Sergeant Mascoro. The intent of this critical incident brief is to provide transparency to the public, an accurate representation of the events that took place, and to provide context for the incident.
Pay very close attention to the details they give about the officer being there. And then when we get to the end of this, when we discuss the different reports that were out, you'll see that they're not trying to be transparent. They're trying to guide the way this looks. They want to make it to where it looks a certain way, not actually transparent.
All footage shown is that of Sergeant Mascoro's body-worn camera. For investigatory purposes and to provide privacy for some individuals contained within the video, small portions have been redacted and their identities concealed. Sergeant Mike Mascoro is a 24-year U.S. Air Force veteran with 8 years at the Thermopolis Police Department. Additionally, he has served as a sergeant for the last 2 years. Thermopolis Police Department, along with the Hot Springs County Health Department, had been conducting an investigation based on complaints of methamphetamine use and distribution out of McDonald's by employees. On April 28, 2023, at approximately 9 a.m., Sergeant Mascoro, along with health inspectors and a Hot Springs County Sheriff's Office deputy, responded to the McDonald's as part of this investigation. While there, Sergeant Mascoro encountered Buck Larimore, who provided Sergeant Mascoro with incorrect information pertaining to his identity. Additionally, Sergeant Mascoro and the Hot Springs County deputy discovered methamphetamine concealed in the baby changing table in the bathroom immediately after observing Mr. Larimore enter and exit the bathroom in a short amount of time.
I don't know about you, but there's been several times where I've gone to the bathroom, been out within 25, 30 seconds, blowing my nose, washing my hands, grabbing some toilet paper for tissues and whatnot. So that I don't think that would be probable cause for any kind of contact.
Right there behind his big guy.
After observing Mr. Larimore enter and exit the restroom rapidly after his arrival, Sergeant Mascoro discusses his observations with the Hot Springs County Sheriff's deputy.
Squatted down. Jamie told me that he took off over here, and I came around. He was coming out of the bathroom. So. Yeah.
Inside that compartment, there's like little plastic cups. Some type of something inside of them.
Sergeant Mascoro conducted a search of the men's restroom. A canine alerted to drug presence at the baby changing station. Upon an in-depth search, Sergeant Mascoro recovered a plastic container with methamphetamine.
First name Buck?
Yeah, Buck.
Last name?
Larimore.
Sergeant Mascoro spoke with Mr. Larimore, having reasonable suspicion Mr. Larimore had been in possession of methamphetamine. Sergeant Mascoro compelled Mr. Larimore's identification. Mr. Larimore misspelled his last name and provided an inaccurate date of birth. Sergeant Mascoro also offered Mr. Larimore an opportunity to submit to a drug screen in order to exonerate him as a suspect. Mr. Larimore declined.
Larimore. And what's your date of birth?
12/17/88.
What's your address?
I prefer not to give that to you.
Sergeant Mascoro left the scene and later discovered Mr. Larimore had intentionally provided incorrect identifying information. Sergeant Mascoro also learned Mr. Larimore had left his work shift early without telling anyone.
Lying to the police about your identification is never a good idea, but you do have the right to not incriminate yourself. You also don't have to ID yourself. in the state of Wyoming. Much like Texas, Wyoming is you only have to identify yourself if you've been arrested. Now, providing false information can and will get you charges in just about every jurisdiction in the United States, including Thermopolis, Wyoming, which comes into play shortly.
Mascaro contacted the Hot Springs County Attorney's Office and provided the details of the investigation. The county attorney agreed Sergeant Mascaro had probable cause to either cite or arrest Mr. Larimore. Sergeant Mascaro arrived at Mr. Larimore's residence to take him into custody. Sergeant Mascaro was the only officer on duty and was not able to secure an additional backup officer. Mr. Larimore eventually came to the door, and Sergeant Mascaro informed him of the charges and advised him he was under arrest. Mr. Larimore refused to exit the residence and argued with Sergeant Mascaro about the charges. Mr. Larimore finally shut the door on Sergeant Mascaro. Believing Mr. Larimore would flee out the back and with no officers on scene to prevent Mr. Larimore's escape, Sergeant Mascaro forced entry into the residence.
That whole part about him fearing that he'd flee the residence actually comes into play pretty big later on when they do the investigation on what kind of reasons they can go into a property without a search warrant or an arrest warrant.
Pretty good. Can I talk to you, please?
Yeah, I'm talking right now. What's up?
Come on. All right, you're going to jail today. Come on out here.
No, I'm not.
You're going to jail. I have.
What?
If you make me break this door down, I will.
For what, sir?
Because you interfered with me.
How'd I interfere?
Come
with
outside. It's going to go two ways.
Okay,
You either come out, or I'm going to break the door in.
Tell me how I interfered with you. If you want me to work with you, work with me. What
I'm going to
did
break
I
the
do?
door down.
What did I do?
You interfered. You gave me the wrong name, wrong date of birth.
Buck Larimore,
Come out.
12/17 of '89, sir.
Buck, I'm going to break this and come in after you.
Upon entering, Sergeant Mascaro was met with Mr. Larimore in the hallway pointing a .45 caliber pistol at him. Mr. Larimore fired, hitting Sergeant Mascaro in the right arm and right chest, knocking him to the ground. Mr. Larimore approached, firing once more in an attempt to execute Sergeant Mascaro. Sergeant Mascaro returned fire with 7 shots from the floor, forcing Mr. Larimore to retreat backwards into the bedroom.
During this short period here, this is the exchange of gunfire, but because of YouTube sensitivity, we are not going to play any gunfire. And now we're going to blur it because of the blood.
They're up, 2. Shots fired, shots fired, shots fired. Shots fired.
Sergeant Mascaro was able to retreat to the kitchen. At this point, Mr. Larimore re-emerged from the bedroom. Sergeant Mascaro fired once, striking Mr. Larimore. 2 additional shots were fired, and Mr. Larimore dropped to the ground. Mr. Larimore is heard saying, "Stop, stop," and then stops moving. Sergeant Mascaro used no additional force after that point.
Show me your hands! Show me your hands! Show me your hands! Show me your hands! Move. What are you doing?
Sergeant Mascaro collapsed after assessing Mr. Larimore to no longer be armed or a threat. Sergeant Mascaro sustained life-threatening injuries from a bullet wound to his right arm and right chest.
Shots fired, shots fired, shots fired. I need help. I'm down. I've been shot. Help. Suspect is in the house. Suspect is in the house. No, I'm shot. I'm shot. Help. 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 I don't know.
Sergeant Mascaro was able to exit the residence, where he was later treated and transported by emergency medical services, ultimately being life-flighted to Casper, where he remained in the ICU for several days. Mr. Larimore was pronounced dead on scene. The incident was investigated by the Wyoming Division of Criminal Investigation and presented to a special prosecutor for review. The special prosecutor determined Sergeant Mascaro's use of force was justified. As such, Sergeant Mascaro was cleared of any criminal wrongdoing. A search warrant was later executed on the residence, where methamphetamine and evidence of distribution was located. Thermopolis Police Department remains committed to the protection and service of its citizens and transparency in all of its actions.
Okay, so anywhere in there did you hear the Thermopolis narration talk about the lawfulness of that officer being able to break into that home? He didn't say, hey, I have a warrant for your arrest, search warrant, anything like that. He broke into the man's home without a warrant. And this is discussed by the special prosecutor. So here we're going to have a dramatic reading of the findings from this news report. It's pretty interesting. It's flat out says this cop. Yeah, you'll see.
All right, here's the article by Cowboy State Daily about this incident. Thermopolis cop cleared in fatal shooting, but illegally broke into home. That's a heck of a title. Right here it says, the special prosecutor determined Thermopolis Police Sergeant Mike Mascaro illegally broke into a suspect's home in April, causing a fatal shootout. But a provision for police officers in Wyoming self-defense law protects them from criminal charges. Let's look at this crap. So here he is. This just really irritates me. Like, it really irritates me. All right, so we're going to skip through this stuff. If you guys want to read it, you can pause it. So the decision, September 21st, 2023 decision, Hot Springs County Attorney Jill Logan released Wednesday to the Cowboy State Daily that Sweetwater County Attorney Daniel E., I can't say that name, Daniel E., who they appointed as a special counsel for the case, analyzed the shooting against Wyoming self-defense and criminal laws. While he ultimately found that Mascaro was justified in shooting Larimore, the encounter didn't have to happen at all. I don't know, man. This was a completely avoidable incident, wrote Mr. E. I agree. Sergeant Mascaro felt that breaking into a person's domicile was the best course of action for the misdemeanor of interference with a peace officer. But Mr. E. added his job as a prosecutor was not to determine Mascaro's potential civil culpability for the break-in, but instead to decide whether the sergeant was justified to fire back under Wyoming self-defense laws. Hold on. He should be looking at the justifiable criminal culpability of Mascaro breaking into these people's home. And they said he was justified in shooting him. That's a sticky one. So let's go down here a little bit. We don't need to read all this, how it happened. You know, we got the video right here. Back and forth at the door. Stop breaking my door, she said. Mascaro's back in the kitchen. Then, boom. Larimore's dead. Mascaro's in critical condition. Mr. E. involved multiple state laws to break down those 3 hours leading to Larimore's death. First, he contemplated whether Mascaro had probable cause to believe Larimore had interfered with a police officer. Mascaro did. I agree with that. He gave him false ID. In fact, he did have probable cause to believe Larimore had violated the law. Mr. E. said, though, he called it questionable that a jury would have ultimately convicted Larimore under that same statute. So, sounds to me like the prosecutor would be like, I don't know if he'd prosecute it. Police only need probable cause to implicate someone in a violation, whereas juries need proof beyond a reasonable doubt to convict someone. I honestly believe that the jury would have convicted him. He knows how to spell his last name. He knows his date of birth. When Mascaro came to the trailer, he gave him the correct spelling and correct date of birth. So he probably would have been convicted of it. Now, this is what I remember. Is he going to run? That takes a bit of thinking about, and there's some kind of decision making in this process involving, is he going to run? So, is he going to run? When it came to whether Mascaro had grounds to arrest Larimore, the law has a few more requirements. For felonies, probable cause is enough to make an arrest without a warrant. Remember, he didn't have a warrant. But for misdemeanors, like interference, the arresting officer needs more than probable cause to arrest someone without a warrant if the arrest isn't happening right after the alleged crime. This was several hours later that he was at the home from the McDonald's, so it didn't just happen. So the spacing in between, he should have gotten a warrant. He also needs to demonstrate that the subject would have fled justice, would have injured people or property, or would have destroyed or hidden evidence if not arrested immediately. During the DCI investigation into the shooting, Mascaro told the special agent Keel Holder that he thought Larimore would flee justice since the man left work without telling anyone, which he had to run in with the cops. He lied to him. Just, I'm out, see ya. I can do a job tomorrow. Mr. E countered, saying that's not enough evidence that someone will skip town. Just because he quit work or walked out doesn't mean he's going to leave town. He goes, there's no evidence other than this assumption by Mascaro to indicate that Larimore would essentially quit his job, pack up his belongings, leave the area, possibly defaulting on his home lease, just to avoid possible misdemeanor interference charge for allegedly lying to law enforcement, wrote Mr. E. Now, I would add to it that potentially the drugs were his, they could find out they were his, and he, wants to avoid a drug charge. But there's no proof that was his drugs. So this is what I'm thinking the cop is thinking. Well, those are his drugs. He's trying to leave. He's going to bounce, whatever. So the body cam evidence is clear that Larimore refusing to submit to the drug test or give his address bothered Mascaro. The prosecutor continued, which it did. It irritated him. He asked multiple times. He doesn't have to submit to those. The sergeant spoke to multiple people after the interaction, talking about Larimore's motives and demeanor. He ultimately disregarded the deputy county attorney's advice that he just write a ticket or citation, announcing hours after his interaction with Larimore he was going to arrest him, says the decision. Now, this one here, cool. This is where it gets a little thick. Don't shoot cops who break in. Mr. E returned to Wyoming self-defense law. Self-defense. It's important. The Castle Doctrine says a person can use defensive force if he believes someone is entering his home unlawfully and forcibly, because there is a presumption that the person breaking in by force is there to commit violence. I agree. At first glance, it looked like Larimore was justified to shoot Mascaro under the Castle Doctrine. I would agree with that, but then another statute, 6-2-602C, says that presumption of violence doesn't apply to police who are performing their official duties. Yeah. So Mr. E hit a quandary here. The statute exempts police for performing their official duties, but it doesn't stipulate those duties must be lawful. So if they're performing a raid on a home with a search warrant, can they force themselves upon the females in the house because they were acting in their official duties? Does this give them carte blanche in Wyoming to do whatever they want in the commission of a raid or an arrest or while they're on duty? Because that's what this says. Mr. E hinted that lawmakers can fix this discrepancy. By leaving the term lawful out of the statute, the legislature has decreed that the officer does not have to be acting lawfully, but only performance of his official duties, he wrote. Mascaro was not acting lawfully by forcing his way into Larimore's habitation. However, he was indeed in the performance of his official duties. If Larimore had survived, that portion of Wyoming's self-defense laws wouldn't have justified him to shoot Mascaro, Mr. E said. That right there just gives Wyoming police carte blanche to do anything they want while they're on duty. That's what this says. So they pull you over and you have, say, you're about to go buy a car, cash for a car, brand new, you've been saving it for years. And I know people that do this, drop 50 grand. So you got it with you in cash, headed to the car lot. The cops pull you over because of a taillight out or, a signal violation, lane change violation. And they find all this money. No drugs, no hinting of drugs. You're like, oh, I'm going to buy a car. Look, here's the proof of my appointment. And they could just steal it because they're acting in their duties. There's no recourse. This Wyoming needs to fix this in now. So, can you shoot back? The prosecutor then pivoted to examine whether Mascaro was justified to fire back. Mascaro backed into the kitchen after Larimore shot him. 30 seconds passed before he returned fire. Wyoming's stand your ground law says that people don't have a duty to retreat from an attack if they are at the site lawfully. Again, lawfully. You can't be the aggressor in a situation and then shoot. That's just not how this works. You can't pick a fight, pull a gun on someone, they shoot you, then you shoot back, and that's justified. It doesn't work this way. The statute contradicts itself, wrote Mr. E. On the one hand, Larimore couldn't fire on an officer who barged into his home while on duty, while on the other hand, Mascaro couldn't justify his actions under stand your ground because he wasn't there lawfully. The contradiction drove Mr. E into common law, or the body of court decisions interpreting scenarios like this one. How many in Wyoming are cops just breaking in people's houses and shooting people? I want to know that. Before Wyoming passed self-defense laws, the state Supreme Court asserted that people have a duty to retreat from a deadly situation only if retreating is a reasonable alternative. By firing back from the floor, Mascaro had a little time to retreat through the back door, but to do so would have compromised his cover. So once he shot back, he could have hopped up and run out the back door, potentially. But doing so would have put himself in a dangerous position, and I agree with that. I'll agree with that. He would have faced other unknowns, such as whether Larimore had more bullets and more guns, and whether the back door was even operable and unlocked on both sides. Reasonable questions here. The investigation later revealed that Larimore did have other loaded guns in the house, but hadn't grabbed them. And at that time, Mascaro had no idea if he had any other guns on him or around him. Mascaro, wounded, was in a precarious position, wrote Mr. E. The reasonable option would be to hold position and return fire if the opportunity presented itself. I agree. When Larimore did return from cover, it was difficult to determine whether he was armed. Very difficult. Pausing the body cam video reveals that Larimore wasn't armed, but the rapidity of the events in real time, coupled with the fact that Larimore had already shot Mascaro, leads to the reasonable presumption that Larimore was armed when Mascaro fired from his position in the kitchen, wrote Mr. E. It was a shot from the kitchen that killed Larimore, the decision says. The fact that Brandy Larimore, the female in the video, was not shot in this crossfire, or that both men did not die, is a blessing in this calamity. So, I agree. You don't know. There's very few guns that only have 2 rounds in them. He only shot twice. Come to find out, the gun the guy had shot the deputy or the officer with only had 2 rounds in it. There were no more rounds in that gun. So, not going to go there. Mr. E's analysis focused only on criminal culpability and justification. It hints there may be civil issues, but characterizes the realm as outside the prosecutor's scope of consideration. The final determination of whether Mascaro committed criminal homicide or acted in a criminal manner when firing the shot that killed Larimore ultimately resides in self-defense, reads the decision. So someone breaks into your home with weapons, and you defend your home from said person with weapons, they are allowed to shoot and kill you? No. It can't work like that. I mean, it absolutely cannot work like that. So now we're going to go. So let's look at something here. Breaking into a habitation, that's considered burglary, right? Wyoming Code, Title 6, Chapter 3, Offenses Against Property, Article 3, Burglary and Criminal Intrusion. So let's do a little reading. Burglary or aggravated burglary and the penalties. A person is guilty of burglary if, without authority, he enters or remains in the building, occupied structure, or vehicle, or separately secured or occupied portion thereof with intent to commit theft or a felony therein. I would make the argument arresting a man without a warrant is akin to kidnapping. It sounds to me like a felony. Not only that, I'm wondering if some kind of charge within Wyoming law has something around, justifying their actions or their duties, violation of their oath of office, how those rank. So next, let's go to C. Aggravated burglary is a felony punishable by imprisonment for not less than 5 years, no more than 25 years, a fine of not more than $50,000 or both, if in the course of committing the crime of burglary, the person, I, is or becomes armed with or uses a deadly weapon or a simulated deadly weapon. The Sergeant Mascaro broke into the home with a firearm, most likely a taser, a baton, or an asp of some kind. So yeah, I'd say he's got some weapons on him or deadly weapons on him. I mean, tasers have been called deadly weapons or
akin to them all over the country. He's got a pistol on him, which he uses to actually kill the guy. So I would say this would be aggravated burglary. I absolutely believe that this fits the crime here. So if they want to say the shooting is justified and there was a criminal act breaking into the home, why doesn't he get charged with aggravated burglary? That's what I want to know. Now let's see how the city responded to him coming back from the hospital. Here you go. There's also video of people waving their flags, a whole parade route and everything. They're celebrating a man that broke the law and resulted in a community member's death. Whether or not he was a drug dealer or not, doesn't matter. He still has the right to a trial, not to have someone just skirt the law to do whatever they feel like. That's just so bad. I don't like it. Tell me what you guys think. Links in the description for this article that we read, as well as the original video. Take care of yourself and each other. I'll see you.